Hello and welcome to the Telltale Cake, where we tell tales with cake and we try to ignore the corpses under the floorboards. With me, calling in all the way from Nevada, is my dear friend Rachel. Now, Rachel, do you say it Nevada or Nevada? I've never been clear on that.
Nevada, a lot of people are very particular about it. It's really funny because if you say the other way, and it's so hard for me to say it the other way now that I'm just like I have to really force it out. Like, yeah, I can't do it right now. But they immediately anybody from Nevada actually, even if you haven't lived here like super long, you know that those people are not from Nevada. So Nevada, yeah, no, there, there you go.
Okay, so in fact, Rachel is calling in from Nevada. And she is a geologist and aspiring writer in her own right. Have you had anything published?
Technically, I'm actually second author on a scientific research paper because
That
I
counts.
did a lot of the research back in college. But as far as like creative writing, I have not been published. I have been
Yet.
sending letters to agents though. So
So you're working on it. And I hope that one day soon we'll be able to feature your original work on this show. So tell me, what are we reading and why are we reading it?
all right. So we are reading Clan of the Cave Bear. Jean M. Auel, and I never really knew how to pronounce her last name. I've just always gone off what I know.
I've been avoiding the issue, and I might continue to avoid that issue. And just call her Jean or something like that, which I realize is a little familiar and presumptuous, but I'm also on the not being able to pronounce her last name train. This is a library book, but it looks like we've got the same copy, which I like.
Yeah, I've had this one for a while. I had like the actual paperback version a long time ago. I don't know what happened to it within all those moves. So, yeah,
This was published back in 1980, which I believe might be before either of us were born.
very much so. And I picked it up when I was about 9 years old, interestingly enough.
That seems like maybe a little young to read it, considering. But apparently you really liked it at 9 years old. You said you were very obsessed with this whole series.
Yeah, I after a while I really enjoyed the story. And honestly, like I was such an avid reader, and I was very much a lone wolf in the sense of I never really like hung out with too many friends. So books were my friends, and I had all kinds of different, little like kids books, and then I picked up this one and just kept reading it. And I've read it I don't know how many times now. So
What do you think keeps attracting you to this?
um which I'm not near as obsessed with it anymore, but it was just the idea of like life back in that time, just survival as we were talking about it. It was really difficult. And I was always interested in like Robinson Crusoe, Treasure Island, all these like where you really have to survive. And that's what attracted me to it. Like this little girl is completely lost after a huge earthquake, and she doesn't have family. She gets adopted by these, we call them Australopithecus. And in the book, it's the clan members, they're these people who don't know any language. They just have sign language. And she has to learn how to live with them. It was just fascinating to me. So it just drew me in. I loved it.
It was really interesting to me, all the research that she clearly did. Now,
Mhm.
at the same time, it did cause me a little bit of cognitive dissonance because a lot of what we know about early hominids has changed since 1980.
Yeah.
Most notably, this idea that they had these strict gender roles like men hunt, women gather. That does not seem to have been true based on what we know now, uh, in that we have found several burials with uh, female remains that were clearly buried with hunting regalia have been discovered,
Yeah.
which has challenged that. But this was really very well researched for what we knew at the time. And particularly what I found out was that she really seemed to have focused on a lot of the research coming out of Shanidar, which is a early Neanderthal burial site in what is now Iraq, that has a lot of skeletons. So that was very fascinating. I spent a long time reading about early hominids myself after reading this book.
Really, gotcha. And I switch that off. Yeah, Australopithecus is something else. Yeah, it's the Neanderthals. And yeah, there have been a lot of like strides and like scientific advancement on what we know now. But I think she even probably put in, a lot of, gender war or all this other stuff. And it also just kind of the storyline too. But it was fascinating how much effort, like the tool making even, and all the implements that they had to use. Like she goes into so much detail, and some of that, like especially when I first read it the first 2-3 times, I really devoured that. I thought like, wow, like this is really good. And for me, if ever in the future we do have an apocalyptic event, I'll turn to these books because it's legitimate, like on how they did it, So I don't have to have like a how-to book. I've got a nice little book here that already has it.
It'll be helpful. It's one of the things that will probably help us through like the climate change crisis, which is probably going to happen any day now. One of the ways that I was really reading it was kind of as an allegory about how hard and scary any kind of change is when you're in a situation where if you make a mistake, you might just, not eat that day or for quite a while. So on this show, we like to eat cake with our books. And you were just telling me you had a little bit of a baking disaster.
Yes, I'm gonna make sure you guys can see this. So it's kind of hard to tell. I put it in the wrong type of pan and it didn't cook all the way through. So it's mostly cake and quite a bit of batter in there. I'm
You
normally a decent baker, but nah, this one failed.
There's a reason I often bake a day or two before I record these. So if I make horrible mistakes, I have time to throw it out and start over. But I also can do that. I live right across the street from a grocery store. I've got a refrigerator. I've got some spare time. I'm not spending days collecting the honey and grinding the flour and have only one shot at this.
Yeah, but had one taste.
How is it?
I still really like it. And I'm a batter person. I'll take like not even just little like fingertips of it. I really like batter. But the cake itself, I'm gonna have to try this again because it's really good.
What I like about it is how honeyed it is. There's like a full cup of honey in here. And that makes it's kind of a thick cake and it's just got this really sweet honey flavor. So if you like honey, it's a very easy, in my opinion, though I feel bad saying that now, but it's not too difficult of a recipe to get a lot of honey bang for your buck.
And to be fair, I would have given it some more tests. I was just so busy past few days. I'm like, yeah.
Same. I just have the advantage that I've made this a time or two before. Now that we have our cake and I've also got my coffee, let's judge this book by its cover. Because how else would we ever judge books?
Exactly. Yep.
So this is the cover from the first printing, and I'll put up a picture on the screen so people can see it better. It looks very lush. It's all green. It's got a deer. It's got flowers. I'm actually a fan of this. I think this is a very nice cover.
You can see that like it's kind of a cave right there, and that's like supposed to be fire. For the longest time, I thought it was like something red hanging. But
Oh, I did not realize it was fire until you said it, so thank you.
yeah. So for the longest time, and it was only a few years ago that because I didn't have this like actual cover too, that I looked again. Oh, that's what that's supposed to be.
And fire is super important for them, so that works out.
Yeah.
The jacket illustration is by an artist named Hiroko. Uh, who I'm not familiar with, but I will probably look up some more about this artist because I like this. This is nice. It's very pleasant to look at.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how good of an impression of the book it gives me, but it's a cover that would make me pick up the book and look at it.
Yeah.
And what more can we ask of a cover? So let's get into it, shall we? We've been talking about how it's survival, and it opens with this very land before time type earthquake. We've got a little Cro-Magnon girl, Ayla, and she's maybe 5 years old. Her mother dies, and then she's just alone. She has no support system. She doesn't really have any skills because she's 5. So she is just kind of alone in the world, wandering around.
That has to be terrifying,
Yes.
honestly.
I would be terrified if I were in that situation, and I am not 5. I have some actual skills, maybe not enough for that situation, but more than if I were 5.
She runs into an entire pack of cave lions, or
Yeah,
pride,
cave lions.
pride of cave lions, and then she gets attacked, and that was one of like the biggest scenes that really like set me for this book. She gets like a really bad scratch, which actually helps her get into the clan, which is kind of interesting, and also sets her against some of the other people too. So that was like a really significant part of it. And me being a kid and loving animals like I did, I was just like, whoa, like how big were these cave lions? And as a kid and no internet, I didn't research it. I just had like this big vision of, okay, maybe bigger than a desk. I don't know.
I did not research that. So how big, in fact, are cave lions?
um, so they're almost like twice the size, if I remember right. They're like twice the size of regular big cats, like great cats.
Oh, wow.
Like they're massive. And so if you think of that, they didn't really have like manes as big as the lions we think of today. And they're just these huge creatures. And little bit of a spoiler, later on, she actually has a pet one later in a different book, and she goes into a little bit more detail, and he gets almost to the size of some of the smaller horses in that time. Like they get really huge. It's just like, how
Oh, wow.
that has to be so terrifying. I mean, if you're a kid, she finally gets in this little cave and he just gets in and scratches. But that thing's massive. Absolutely, it could have killed her.
Hmm. I mean, a not cave lion, like a regular lion like we have now, could have killed her.
I know. So it's just that thought of just overwhelmingly fear. She did a great job, I feel like, on some of those aspects. Just the emotions in it. It's good.
The sense of danger is real.
Yeah.
Now, she is rescued from dying of the wounds from the cave lion by a group of Neanderthals. And are we saying Neanderthals or Neanderthals? I'm not totally clear.
I have no idea. I think it just kind of based on however you want to say it. I know some people say it one way and the other. So I'm not in archaeology, so I cannot give you a great answer on that.
I like Neanderthals, so I'll say that. However you want to say it, whether you want to agree with me or not on that, totally up to you.
I don't know. And for a lot of people, so Cro-Magnon is actually just a term for the like early Homo sapiens, like in Europe and Asia and Africa. So like it's, even though it's a certain title of people, it's still there. It's the same people as us, like they're Homo sapiens.
Okay, so just to be clear, Ayla is kind of a whole different species from these Neanderthals that she's just encountered.
Exactly.
Um, so she looks a lot different and she's got some different things going on. But one of the Neanderthal women, Isa, sees her and picks her up and brings her along, wants to fix her. Isa is kind of the medicine woman. She's the healer, the wise woman of the group. And this maybe somewhat based on one of the burials in Shanidar, which is known as the flower burial, where one of the skeletons was found with the remnants of a lot of flowers that may have had medicinal properties around them. Now, unfortunately, it turned out later that these were deposited by animals and were not part of the original burial, but that was not known in 1980.
Yeah, I didn't really get into some of that type of research, but it's been interesting to kind of like read through it, and kind of a back history on me too. My mom has always been a botanist, and she like pretty much a lot of plants actually have medicinal properties, like almost every single one. And it just depends on what it is, and it's just really interesting, and I found that cool at the time. I am not much of a person who's into plants. Sure, for medical properties, sure, I'll do that, but no. um I thought it was interesting, like how much they put in there with like just also like how both Isa and Ayla actually used a lot of them. So went into a lot about.
So much detail. At some points, it was almost like reading a textbook with a storyline thrown in.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of was.
Isa has adopted this like strange little girl who's dying, and she actually manages to fix the dying part, which is quite impressive because I believe Ayla has been infected from this cave lion, which is not surprising. And this is obviously before antibiotics. What we learn is that Isa is going to kind of need permission to keep this child because we these Neanderthals are very hierarchy, very rule oriented, very change resistant people. And they're also very gender roles. So the clan chief is obviously a man, and he has pretty much absolute power over what clan members do, who they mate with, etc. But one thing that helps is that they have this totemic belief system in which each person sort of has a spiritual connection with the type of animal that's their totem. And clearly, Ayla has been marked by the very powerful totem of the cave lion. And their shaman, their wise man, Kreb, is very convinced that Ayla is special. She has been marked by the cave lions. So our clan chief, Brune, is kind of convinced to take her in and take care of her.
I found him as a fascinating character. She only goes into detail really at the very beginning, except for a few like little hints in throughout the book. But he was very disfigured, and you keep forgetting that he only had like one arm. And if anybody who's actually read the book and watched the movie, I believe in the movie he didn't even he had like all his limbs and stuff, and he just kind of looked a little funny. No, like this man was one eye and only had one arm, in a completely different time frame where if you were like that, you were likely to be left alone. But he had been marked by the cave bear at that time, therefore that's
So
how he became the mogre. So I thought that was cool.
this is another character that may be based on one of the skeletons in the Shanidar cave. One of them showed the marks of having suffered very disfiguring injuries to a point where this individual would not have been able to be a fully functional person in this world. So it would have needed help from the other clan members to survive. So it's interesting that that is evidence that Neanderthals did have this kind of compassion, this kind of willingness to take care of each other. Because this is a really brutal world where if you are disfigured, if you have these like physical handicaps, you may not be able to survive.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what makes a lot of humans human. So like being able to take care of each other and say, hey, you can't go hunt, here's some food, you know.
And it helps that he does have this status of Mogre. He's got this special spiritual connection. He does all the special men's spiritual rights stuff.
Oh, he also had like the actual like disfiguration of his head a little bit too, and apparently that was what made him so special too. Like he could actually do stuff with his mind that was beyond. And I think that was just an assumption from Gene as the writer, but I thought that was Whoa, blew my mind as a kid.
Yeah, in this world, Neanderthals all have this access to spatial memories. So they can access remembered things from their ancestors, and they can also do sort of Star Trek type mind melds with each other under certain conditions when led by like a Mogger that's as special as Krug, which is really cool. There's, of course, no evidence for or against this sort of thing because that's just not something I think we'd ever have enough to say one way or another. It's really hard to study the past when it's that far past.
Yeah, studying soft tissue is almost impossible. It doesn't fossilize hardly ever.
Mm-hmm.
It's super, super rare. So ergo, like studying Neanderthals or any other like pre Homo sapien individual, like you're only going to have um, just the skeleton to go off of.
And that's really difficult. And you're probably most of the time not even talking about complete skeletons. You're talking about fragments. So Ayla starts growing up, and she is very different from the clan, the Neanderthal clan of the cave bear. She, for one thing, she is a lot taller than they are because she's a bit more upright. She doesn't hunch over as much. Uh, she has blonde hair, and blue eyes, and she cries, which is something that they don't do. And this is emotional lacrimation is it's hard to tell when that started in humans because again, a lack of soft tissue. So it's not totally clear whether early hominids like Neanderthals would cry emotionally or not. But Jean has just in Jean's world they don't, and it is a mark of being a true Homo sapien to cry emotionally. And it's actually quite funny because Isa and Kreb just think something is wrong with her eyes because they leak periodically.
Yeah, she has to control a lot. And I mean, as a kid, cry here and there on like minor things. And at the time, like I didn't know anything about like all the different types of like lacrimation, as you said.
Mm.
And there's a few different types, but I was just like, huh, why is that so different? But the book explains it. The clan, they only, or the Neanderthals, they only have the basal tear. So if that's the ones that keep your eyes wet. And then there's the reflex where if something gets in your eye, that's when you start getting those tears to help heal it. Like, okay, I wouldn't have known any of this as a kid until much later. Interesting. But as far as emotional, I thought that was wild. Why do we cry? Oh, because we're sad. And it wasn't that these people didn't get sad, they did, but they showed it in a much different way than Ayla did. I mean, completely different species, so
She's much louder than they are and uses her words a lot more. Well, she uses her voice a lot more of her words because the clan does a lot of talking with sign language. It's actually quite hard for her to make that emotional leap that the gestures they're making are talking. So when she only uses her voice to talk, she's really only being able to partially communicate with them. And I really enjoyed this part of the book that just shows all the differences.
yeah, I thought that was wild. Actually, wow, interesting little memory popped in my head. So, um, a few years starting this book, I actually had a friend who was deaf and she was partially mute. And I knew a lot of sign language. Now I've forgotten a lot of it, but I think that's what might have drawn me to this book too. So yeah.
I don't speak any sign language. I kind of wish I did. It's a very beautiful language just to watch. I always like it when I'm in lectures where there's a sign language interpreter and you can just watch them talk because it's so expressive.
Yeah, really is. But continue.
As Ayla grows up, her differences really start putting her in some conflict with the clan. For one thing, she wants to hunt. And this is something that's strictly forbidden for women. It will cause ritual problems for reasons. But she likes to sneak off by herself and practice with a slingshot. And of course, we get long descriptions of how the slingshots are made, how these leather straps are made. And then I forgot to look up whether this is like a thing we still think or not, but apparently the way that the Neanderthal shoulders work, it's actually difficult for them to fully extend their shoulders and use a slingshot.
Yeah.
Which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah. And I only remember partially reading about like how it was much easier for her and how like Homo sapiens do a little differently. But I do remember reading that the double throw that she like figures out, that's not apparently it you can't be done. So I thought that was interesting later on when I did a little bit more research.
She does innovate. Speaking of that, she invents a double throw, which is impossible, but we're not worried about that.
Yeah, store.
And this helps her out because her life in the clan, she's increasingly unhappy with the restrictions put on her as a woman. And also, the clan chief's spoiled, bratty son hates her because she's different and she basically competes with him for attention, which he's not good with. Browd. And of course, you're in a situation where spoiled, bratty men can have pretty much unlimited power and also kind of zero accountability, which is so different from today.
Yeah, for the most part.
But
Yeah,
never.
he was just such a character to dislike, and there were only a couple redeemable moments. And spoiler alert, yeah, he was awful pretty much up into the end. So
So not a lot of moral depth to this character, we're saying.
no, he didn't really have a lot of humanity in him. It didn't seem like so, but it definitely pushed the story a lot, and it was kind of that underlying like war of sexes in there. So I thought that didn't really occur to me as a kid, but later reading it, dude, this is a little bit more deep than I expected when you reread it as an adult.
The fact of her hunting comes to light in this kind of the sort of fantasy moment that I feel like we all dream about, where our skills can be used to save the day. Uh, Ayla and a couple of the other women are out on a hunting trip, and of course they're not hunting, but men go out, they kill animals, and then of course you need to deal with the carcass and prepare it. So they take women along because in this world of strict gender role segregation, once the men kill an animal, they're just done. They are no longer responsible for any of the situation.
Right as everything is going on, they had brought one of the kids. It was Brown's kid, Brown, Brown's little boy, and he gets attacked by a hyena. Nobody was able to do anything except for Ayla, and then she just happens to be like, whoosh, take care of the hyena, and then it just completely shocks all of them. Like, wait, first of all, she saves this child who was in danger. Two, it's a woman with a weapon, and huge ordeal. So yeah.
It's a real struggle for them. Uh, have you ever fantasized about your specific skills being able to save the day dramatically and everybody like notices how good you are at something?
I used to way more so before, but after having had a couple rescue instances, I don't really anymore. So for a lot of people in the world of geology, I got into cave guiding. So I've actually had a couple instances where I've had to help people out of the cave. Somebody broke their leg and we had to get her out. So in these
Oh,
times, it's like I've actually had those chances and I've helped people in those cases. So it's like, yeah, I don't fantasize. I've actually had that happen too many
you
times.
don't have to fantasize.
Yeah, it's just like I've had to save myself in all kinds of wild scenarios. I'm good.
Okay, fair.
Yeah.
Um, I'm still occasionally fantasizing about my specific computer typey skills. Like, I will somehow save someone's life with Linux administration. I don't even know how that will work. My knowledge of tarballing will somehow help someone one day.
You never know if somebody ever falls down like a really long deep area. You know how to use some ropes. You can do that.
That's true. I am good at climbing. The way they deal with her is that they decide she's going to be ritually dead for like a few weeks, I believe. And the way this works is they just all basically shun her, they destroy all her stuff, they won't talk to her. She has to be able to survive without the clan, which in many ways is a literal death sentence, not just a metaphorical death sentence, because life survival is hard here. And the way that the early hominids are doing it is by working together. So
There's
suddenly,
down the street.
yeah, she has to do it all by herself. And also emotionally, she has not been alone since her mother died when she was 5. This is not a society where people are ever alone. There's various polite conventions when they're staying in a cave together. They arrange rocks, and you're not supposed to look at other people and other people's rock circles, but it's still, you're very much never alone.
I'm wondering, because it kind of went into it a little bit. That's probably why Brun actually did that to her instead of doing it for a like long sentence until forever, because he had an inkling that she would be able to survive that. She knew how to hunt and she knew
Mhm.
everything. Brun, in the end, even he had that kind of idea of course she's different. She might have way more differences to be able to do more than we can. And some of the other people were just, kind of surviving. They didn't have that like leadership quality or mentality to keep thinking about, her all the time, you know, but Brent did. So it is just fascinating to see that, like, wow, he could have done way worse.
But he fairly nice. He satisfies clan customs and traditions. She survives. She comes back. This makes Broud absolutely furious that not only is she not really getting in trouble, she's now allowed to hunt with her slingshot. And he doesn't like that. He doesn't like that she gets so much attention. And one way he figures out how to torment her is sexually, which is kind of rough. And this is also why I was a little surprised that you read this at 9.
Yeah. And pretty interesting history of me reading this. So at the age of 9, I didn't know anything about sex. I was reading this and I had my first real description of what sex was. And
That's not a good first description.
it's really not. Like, it was a rape scene and
Mhm.
I was very shocked. But at the same time, I'm going to continue reading this book. I just wanted to know,
Right.
keep on going. And for people who are looking into reading this book and the rest of the series went a little wild with the sex, and it's not in the rape sense at all later. But it starts off with this. I'm just like, wow, yeah, I can't believe I read that, but I did.
Yeah, so that's a really rough introduction to descriptions of sex. Um,
Is what it is now.
it happens, and then we get kind of an interesting look into the way that, unlike the rest of the clan, Ayla is able to extrapolate and generalize and reach some conclusions. Like, she can count.
Yeah.
So it's very unclear to the clan why pregnancy happens, which sounds like a stupid statement until you take a step back and go, well, yes, sex causes pregnancy, but not every sex leads to pregnancy. Like,
Yeah.
there are some people who can have tons of sex and never get pregnant, and other people who can have sex once and it's like insta pregnancy. And some people, it just really, there's a lot of variation in between. So it's hard to even use the scientific method on that. You'd have to really work to figure out what is the relationship exactly
Yeah.
experimentally. So the way the clan thinks that it happens is that, you know, everyone has these animal totems, and male totems are stronger than female totems. And what happens is that the totems do battle, and sometimes the female totems get injured. So that's where blood comes from. And, if a totem gets totally overpowered, then pregnancy happens.
Yeah.
And the prevailing theory is that Ayla will never get pregnant because her totem is a cave lion, which is very strong and very hard to overcome.
Yeah.
But she gets pregnant from being repeatedly raped by Broad. Uh, and she actually kind of reaches the conclusion that it has something to do with Broad's organ, uh, which I think is what it is called. Uh,
Yeah. And I mean, for the clan, it's very spiritual, but to her later have that kind of mental capabilities. Yeah, she comes to that conclusion. Um, it's a very big theme for the rest of the series as well, and I'll just leave it at that. But for her to have gotten pregnant, it was such a big deal, and then it was so difficult for her too. Like, I think that's also what scared me as far as pregnancy. But at the same time, it goes into a lot of detail of how, like, those two kids, or the kid that she has, because they're from two different species, it was obviously going to be very difficult. He was deformed in their eyes, but he was just a mixture.
and some things are just perfectly normal. Like her kid couldn't hold up his own head, which is, of course, one of the weaknesses of our babies. Our babies are pretty much useless. They can't even lift their heads. Like, this leads to some more conflict because typically what happens is that they kill deformed babies because, again, like, it's really tough to put in the resources in this brutal world to raise babies at all, much less babies that may not be able to ever take care of themselves. um Ayla kind of panics, and shortly postpartum she grabs her deformed baby and runs.
I found that very unrealistic, even as a kid. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I was just like, okay, why why would she have done that? They were, it was a good likelihood she knew they were going to do that. But she comes back before, you know, so that she wouldn't have to force their hand, and she didn't want to do that. She was very close, that's what happens when mom has a baby, they form that close bond. But it was interesting that she tried to present that idea of, hey, he's not deformed, I'm different, you guys are different, so obviously the kid is different. So I think it really did make a difference. She was able to reason with the leader. So
Hmm. Though, as someone who has had a baby, immediately, like a couple days postpartum, would you have been able to take your baby and, like, just go to a cave in the hills?
um myself, no. However, having more conversations with other ladies, and for having been in that era, it's hard to say and that's why I'm like, it seems unrealistic, but who knows? I mean, maybe she there, because if you were able to have a child, you're still going to be in recovery. It's still going to be hard, but maybe I myself, it was really hard. And true, I'm very glad I went through it. At the same time, I'm just like, dude, I don't know if I'd ever do that again. And some women, especially nowadays, they have C-sections and stuff. It's really tough on women. So who's to say? But I just found that unrealistic because she had to keep, herself and the baby alive.
Yes. And keep the baby quiet because the clan members were out searching for her.
That's why I was just like, yeah, I don't know about that.
Well, we'll ignore that. One thing I didn't want to ignore, though, is this idea that the Neanderthals and the Cro-Magnons did interbreed, because I think that was sort of a new idea in the 80s,
Yeah.
but it's something we pretty much just accept now, especially with DNA sequencing. In fact, one of the most fascinating research questions that I've ever heard in my life was, how is Ozzy Osbourne still alive, considering? Which is not a bad question.
Yeah.
And so his genes were sequenced, and the conclusion was, well, this dude has a lot of Neanderthal genes, and that seems to be what is helping him survive his sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and biting the head off a live bat.
Maybe that part of him, it was the part that told him to do that.
Was there a bat totem that he was trying to ritually ingest?
Oh, that's a good idea.
That's the most sensible explanation I've ever heard for that.
Yeah, that's pretty good. But it's kind of interesting, and maybe there was a lot more, and there's a lot of research on that. I mean, apparently we have Neanderthals in some of our genes, but not everybody's.
Right. I think it's more concentrated in people in Northern and Western Europe.
Yeah.
Which would kind of make sense. I could be making that up because I sort of forgot, but there is like a specific geographical location where it's more likely. But we do have Neanderthal genes present in our population, so they didn't exactly die out. They're still alive. Through sex.
Yeah, and that's what actually comes to light in the book, and because Grub really was concerned about his species. So I'm jumping ahead, but there was just a moment.
We're about to get there.
Yeah, where it was really interesting. So, but well, we can get there.
Yeah, this comes to light at the All Clan Sports and Games Olympics event.
Great way of saying
I
it.
don't know how else to describe it, but apparently all the scattered groups of the Cave Bear clan come together once every 7 years, and they hang out, they have a feast, they do ritual stuff, they have sports and games day. And it's just a good big old party.
Oh, and the cave bear that they have like at the group that was hosting it, that was a big deal too, because that's the totem of all the clan. So yeah, that was an interesting part.
I thought that was kind of sad, the way they raised the bear as an overfed pet and then killed it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't. I mean, I have a lot of overfed pets around here, but I would never ritually kill them.
Not ritual. Yeah, no. It was kind of a wild time back then, they and the other part of it was, they wouldn't have pets.
No.
Neanderthals. From I don't know the research on it. They didn't have pets, but they did this with the cave bear. They kept feeding him, and it was a big deal to keep feeding him. I found it really weird that they wouldn't name him. So in their sign language, you can say everything else, but you couldn't actually use the actual sign for cave bear, because then he would suddenly remember and attack everyone. Wild thing to have. Some kind of
Very,
weird role.
very sort of horror. If you name something, it appears.
Maybe. And that was just their mentality. Yeah.
Though Ayla actually does semi have pets. She'll find animals that are hurt and she'll keep them in her cave and fix them and then let them go again. It's kind of sweet. And that is one thing about this world. It's a big deal for these early humans to have compassion for other humans like Kreb and take care of him, even though he's not really able to take care of himself. So it may just be a leap too far for many of them to extend that compassion to an animal that can't really directly help them.
Yep. At least not in their eyes, not just yet. And
Yeah. they haven't been able to innovate to that level yet.
Yeah. And it was there that when Ayla gets all dressed up, she helps with that massive ritual. And
Yes.
the rest of the clans were, the rest of the other clan groups were a little hesitant about her, but she was the only one who could perform with Crib. And it was such a wild instance of where they performed the ritual. She was supposed to do this with the datura root and give them this medicine. Um,
To to make them trip balls, basically.
Pretty much. And then later she finds out that they didn't drink all of it. Well, it was a big deal to just throw it away. And she knew how like ritualistic and how big things, she shouldn't even like try and hide the fact that she shouldn't just throw it out. She drinks the rest of it and trips balls, goes into the deep parts of the cave and comes across the men eating this sacrificed human in a sense, and they're eating his brain. And in the sense of, for the clan, it was for them to gain more memory, more intelligence. It was very, very weird part, and Ayla's just disgusted and just keeps going really crazy. Like, but at that point she recognizes how Crab can do something and meld their brains together and their thoughts, and she sees a couple things happen. And Crab actually, and I, this is where I kind of got a little confused. I didn't know if they saw it together, but he kept doing different things and looking into her past and their past, and then he was trying to see the future. That's where it, when you, if you ever read the like rest of the series, it's a major thing. And I was like, wow, this is interesting that he could see so far. And at that point he thought, we are all going to die out, you are the ones that are going to continue. And it wasn't until later that he has a moment with Ayla's son that he realizes, oh, the mixture, no, we won't just completely die out. And that's why I was like, whoa, big old like mind explosion, you know. So um fascinating part of the book, loved it.
Now, if I'd been a little younger when I read this, I would probably have been more startled by the brain eating. At this point in my life, I have read a possibly disturbing amount about ritual cannibalism. It's like a mortuary funeral custom in some parts of the world where you just eat people to keep them with you, which is actually not the worst thing. I mean, there's kind of this, yes, I sort of have this initial ick reaction, but at the same time, it seems sort of nice. There's,
That the idea behind it, yeah. But if
yeah,
you think about it, even scientifically, their atoms and energy is still locked in that body in a sense that like maybe their spirit's gone, but you are taking that into yourself. Not that
mhm.
I'm condoning this or anything, or I want to do it. But
But we're
I,
not judging people who do. It's like a honored ritual for many people in the world.
I get it. I get it. But no, yeah,
Mhm.
not for me. No thanks. I'm not gonna eat my loved ones after they're gone.
I mean, certainly not raw.
Just a little wrong. I think a mortician might be a little hesitant if you ask for a leg to take off.
Like what?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess also I had this reaction where I was a little surprised that it was the men doing it,
Mhm.
because typically what we know about the societies that do practice mortuary cannibalism, it's either generally the women's job to eat the dead, or it's everybody. So it's a little interesting that in this society it's just the men who eat the dead.
Yeah. All for the sake of the story, I guess. But
So we go back to our respective caves. Uh, After this big 7-year gatherings, the cave bear has been killed. The guy that the cave bear killed on his way out has also been eaten. Kreb is having all these heavy thoughts about the future of his whole species. And Brun is like, the clan chief is ready to retire, which is good. Like, people shouldn't have stressful jobs until they retire.
mhm.
Now, unfortunately, he is going to pass clan chieftaincy onto his son, not because his son is a great leader, like nobody thinks that, but because of straight up nepotism, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And one of the first things Brad does with his newfound authority is be petty, which, given what we know about Brad, we're not shocked. So he decides to just completely banish Ayla. And as he does this, there's basically an insta karma moment where there's this giant earthquake that destroys their cave.
Moger is killed in that, and and after having lost Isa, Ayla was just, she was kind of with it. She I feel like she kind of was just, okay, I'm accepting this. I'm gonna head on out. All right. She has to leave her son behind, who she loved,
Yeah.
but he had to stay with the clan.
And what she's going to do is what Moger told her to do before he died, which is go find your own people. Go investigate these people that you came from, because this is the future. So that's where she's heading out to, and that will presumably be the subject of the next several books.
Yep, and it goes really far, and it's kind of a, like I said, interesting series. Definitely just kept going with it, but it focused a lot more on the Homo sapien side too. So I always wondered, what could have happened with like Ayla's son and everything like that, but never really got that kind of aspect. But therein was the end of the book, and continue if you wish.
So the time has come for us to rate this on my unitless sugar scale. So the S stands for sexiness. And this book has a lot of sex, and it's all very uncomfortable. It's not sexy sex.
It is not sexy sex. No, no. Yeah. Just
We
fair warning for anybody who has not actually read this, that they are going to. Yes, it is very, very brutal.
Yeah, you might not want to read this while 9 years old. Just saying. The U stands for uniqueness. And I think this is a very unique book. I've certainly never read anything else about early hominids.
Very much so. And obviously, it was unique to me when I picked it up. But you don't get a whole lot of these stories. Even nowadays, I haven't come across a lot. So,
One thing that stood out to me about all this description of early life was one of the events in the sports and games competition is storytelling, which I really liked. It's, there's these people get together, and they're not just having feats of strength and endurance. They're telling stories. They're competing to see who can tell stories the best. They're reenacting hunts dramatically. And I really like that thought that I've encountered it before, but I liked how codified it was here, that telling stories is one of our primal urges and one of our important skills as humans.
it is. And you should be able to know this by being a reader. You're getting into something that is either real or happened a long time ago, or it's fictional, which this is kind of part of both. Like, it has a lot of history of what our earth has gone through, and our species has in the past, but you get this like vivid story. You do this with every single book you pick up, and as a avid writer right now, it's just like you want to be able to share like some of these wild thoughts that come to your mind. Might as well. It might not have been real. Screw it. Share it with us.
I mean, there's a sense where it might be real, sort of. It tells us real things, like what people do, what they thought, what they felt like. And I mean, obviously, this is a channel about books, so we're big into stories here.
Exactly.
So we like that. The G stands for gender, and there's so much about gender roles in this book
Yeah.
in a way that isn't necessarily true about what we know about Neanderthals now. Uh, and I keep mentioning that because one of my pet peeves is people who bring up these made up cave people stories in order to justify sexism, usually. It's like, oh, well, women aren't good at math because they were the gatherers back in the day. And it's like, neither of those statements are true. I too can make up cave people stories.
It's the whole story between like Brown and Ayla and the gender roles, and it goes a lot further too with the rest of the series too. It's just amazing how differently like people might have wanted this to have occurred, and some people still think, oh hey, there was like strict gender roles, only the women were the gatherers. No.
Which, even if it was true, like, I don't know how that translates to we should tolerate sexism now.
Yeah. So um kind of a note for one of the like few the I think it was the next book or this third, but it actually makes a clear distinction of like there was not near as much sexism with Homo sapiens. So and they go into that. Obviously, I don't know if that's like how correct that was. There's still going to be research. We could research it all day and still probably not really
Mhm.
know. So and if anything, but the other part of it is like Isa was a medicine woman. She did have status in the community.
Yes.
So it was kind of like there is a little bit of sexism, but to them it was so consistent and so standard that they didn't see it. So
And as far as the story goes, there is a very clear message that this this way of life is dying out. Like, this is not going to continue. That the future is this person who rebels against strict gender roles. And I like hearing that the actual Homo sapiens who show up are not into that strict gender role. So the author is very much not on board with sexism, even though she's kind of doing the Neanderthals a little bit dirty on making them out to be much more sexist than they probably were. The A stands for axiness. Franz Kafka says that a book should be an axe for the frozen sea inside us, which is a very interesting quote that can mean a lot of different things. I tend to interpret it as a book that stays with you, that makes you think about the world, makes you maybe see the world in a slightly different way. And of course, it's also about early hominids, so we could maybe also talk about literal axes, though, as you point out, there really aren't many axes in this story.
yeah, I wasn't sure, and I had
I
to
didn't explain
rewatch
them.
a couple of your own other videos because I was like, I not really sure what that's going to be standing for, but they go into detail about actually like stonework and making knives and spears and ads, and I think that's how you say it. But yeah, I think there was only one point where they get into like an axe, but it's a hand axe. It's not attached to anything. So yeah, definitely other weapons, but and for people to actually have reading it, I would think it would change your perspective on some things. There's a lot of people who still to this day don't really know about that kind of part of our world.
It does really make you think, and clearly it has stayed with you since you were 9.
Yeah, definitely.
So, got some axes going on.
Yeah.
Finally, the R stands for readability. And here I struggled a little bit because it's not always a page turner. There is so much research and description that sometimes I'm just like, get to the point. Stop
Yeah.
talking about what the plants they're gathering.
um, to be fair, some of the next books actually didn't have near as much of that. Every once in a while she still did, but I feel like it actually moved way quicker. This is
Okay.
definitely kind of a slow-ish book. And it kind of sets the stage for the rest of them. But really, like, yeah, there's so much it goes into like all the trees, like all the names of everything, like really going into detail about how they're going out and looking for, certain animals and hunting. Just really detailed.
And to be fair, I would probably have had a little bit more tolerance for that if I hadn't also recently started rereading the Lord of the Rings trilogy at the same time. So I think there just came a point where I was like, I can't deal with trees anymore. Stop telling me about trees.
Oh, but some people are just so adamant about their botany, their trees. They just love it. They're like, "Ooh, yay!"
For people who love trees, there's a lot of trees.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the big things that they did that really enjoyed was when the entire like clan actually went out to the sea. Which one was that? And they were going out to fish and stuff. So it's wild that they did that. I don't have it here. I always forget the name of that one. But
They went swimming.
well, she could swim.
Yes, she
She
could
could
swim.
swim.
They couldn't.
Their bodies were actually too heavy, and it was interesting to them that she could, and she had no fear of the water. But no, the idea that they, even though they couldn't swim, they still like went out a little ways in order to catch something like fish, and everything like that. And there's a lot of research, and as a huge theory, which says it's been proven. Who knows? That actual seafood helped evolve our brains to be a little smarter. Like I was just like, that's a huge thing. Yeah. So for that to be occurring during that period, I was just like, okay, interesting. And of course, I didn't know that at the time I read
Huh.
this. So yeah.
I mean, that would tend to make sense because fish have a lot of like fatty oils, and your brain is, of course, fat and needs fat. So eat more cake to develop your brain.
Yeah. I just was, I was entranced. And of course, I'm a big water person. So I was like, ooh, she can swim. And oh, and she saves the day with one of the kids. Like it also just posed a certain aspect of she is a hero to these people, and then they just cast her out at the very end.
Yeah, it's rough.
Yeah, bit of an interesting story. Definitely good to read, but
There's a lot of trees.
there's still a lot of trees, a lot of plants, a lot of trees.
So I've decided to start closing out with doing some bibliomancy to predict the future for our readers for the next month. Now, traditionally, bibliomancy is done by selecting a random passage from an ancient text, typically either the Aeneid or the Bible, and using that to make odd conclusions. Do you have a preference for either the Aeneid or the Bible?
Oh, I don't.
We'll go with the Aeneid then, which is not that. Uh, this is the Aeneid. Okay, now normally we would just flip through it and find something randomly, but of course we're a little bit remote, so that becomes a little bit of a problem. So instead, I'm going to ask you to give me a number between 3 and 354.
76.
76 it is.
This is interesting.
Okay, now if you could also give me a number between 500 and 531.
500 and 531, you said?
Yes.
515.
515. Okay. Moreover, when your fleet has crossed the seas and building altars on the shore, you pay your vows, shroud with a purple veil your head. So I think that the message here is go swimming and wear a purple hat. That is my official recommendation to our readers.
Okay.
So Rachel, thank you so much for calling in from Nevada with all your geologic experience. Do you have any final words for our readers on what they should read?
I mean, if you do enjoy this book, definitely keep going. The story is very fascinating, and the sexiness aspect also does as well.
Improve. All right, read more of John M., whose name we don't quite know how to pronounce. Read more about early hominids.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank
Like
you.
and subscribe.